just a bit background in terms of what is Aiforsite. It's a productivity management platform that was developed in Finland about 6-7 years ago. It's been in the UK since April last year. It's basically an AI-driven remote monitoring video and position data technology that enables you to be able to identify productivity time on site and in real time and do something about it in order to improve the process. At the moment, we've got 120 projects delivered globally, either delivered already or currently in operation. So as far as the background is concerned about the thoroughness of the system and the buildability and user-friendliness of the system, we've got a substantial number of projects behind us to know that it's actually very effective to the construction industry. Why do we need it is a big report, is a big issue in the UK construction industry, and also Olli will reinforce that on his presentation. But as far as UK is concerned, based on the Office of National Statistics report in 2021 on UK productivity, the construction industry, as you can see from the orange graph on the right-hand side, has been stagnating for the last 30 years. If anything, we got slightly worse than we were back in 1995, 96, 97. So despite over the improvements we had in terms of MMC, BIM, new technologies, new industrial systems, the industry has been very stagnated. It's been, growing more or less zero every year in terms of productivity. And productivity here in the UK is measured pounds per man hour, whereas the rest of the UK PLC actually improved by over 30%. So the construction industry is seen in the UK PLC as the sick man of the industry in the UK. So we need to do something more about it. And I think you will find that the presentation today is your first step towards improving your construction productivity and hopefully improving the UK construction industry. So what I'm going to do now is hand you over to Olli, who will take you through the detailed background in terms of how it's been developed and enhanced over the last 5 or 6 years. So Olli, over to you.
Thanks, Vassos. So Vassos shared with you some UK data. And on the next slide, you can see McKinsey research that shows globally. So that's a global phenomenon. We have similar results in Finland, in the United States, in McKinsey report in 2010. All the countries aggregated together have the same phenomenon. Construction labor productivity is stagnating or even getting worse. But it's really quite simple on worker level, where you really need to look at it. So on worker level, the worker needs answers to these questions to figure out whether the work is going to be productive or not. So basically they need instructions what to do, they need to know where the tools and materials are, they need to know how and when work should be done, and the location needs to be ready for them. And even though we are talking about digitalization a lot, at least in Finland, graffiti is often used by construction workers to communicate with each other and complain about problems. So we see all this scribbling in the walls, signifying problems. So we have done many studies globally, and I have been doing studies at Aalto University. Productivity is caused mainly by wasted effort. And it's because workers do not have what they need for productive work. Of course, there are skill differences between workers, but most of the wasted effort is caused by general contractors and owners not giving good enough conditions for workers. And it's a very difficult problem to solve because construction has moving workstations. In factory, everybody is in one location. It's easy to supply materials. It's easy to supply information to the workstation. But construction is really hard to organize so that everybody has the right materials, right equipment, and knows exactly what to do next in that work location, and knows what's going on in different work locations. So we need some digital tools to get better situational awareness. Okay, was.
Yep, next one.
If we go to international studies, traditionally direct work share, how big a percentage of their time people are using in actually installing elements that stay within the building has been used as a productivity metric. And I guess in the UK it's called tool time productivity. But in academic research, the share of direct work is a more commonly used term. And normally it works so that researchers are moving on the construction site and they are making records of what happens, for example, every 5 minutes. And some approaches have continuous tracking, so you could take some camera footage and then categorize the different segments all the time that workers are doing. So basically direct observation based. And there are hundreds of published studies that report these direct work percentages globally. Most of them have been collected in the United States and Canada, so there's real longitudinal research where these values have been reported since 1970s. And most of these studies agree that this direct work and construction labor productivity are correlated. And on the next slide, we see very interesting study using the United States data. Pastor, need to change the slide?
Yes, I have to.
It's not updating here. They had 313 data points from 23 different studies from 1972 and 2010, and they had the construction labor productivity metrics available at the same time interval on national level in both Canada and United States. They found a statistically significant correlation, and they were able to calculate that 1% increase in direct work values increases the output of every worked hour by $0.4 US, which means that if you increase direct work share by 1%, in the US level, it would be $5.4 billion more construction with the same resources. And that's just 36 seconds of installation time for every hour, or 22 minutes per week. So if you can do this in large scale in all projects, we are not talking about big impacts. And this 1% is actually quite simple to achieve. So when we are really focused on it, any master student in my team can increase the direct work productivity by 20%. The challenge is how to do it for everyone on the construction project at the same time and find who is struggling. So I will share some of our results next.
Yeah, next slide.
So we did a quite comprehensive 408 hours of video material data collection related to HVAC and electrical installation, where we had 14 participants, 400 hours of video material, and then we also interviewed and asked for the views of the workers, what's causing wasted time. And if you are interested in this, at the bottom of the slide, there's a reference, so that article is also available. And probably can be shared by Iana to all participants after the webinar.
Yeah, we'll share that with everybody.
Next slide, please.
Yeah.
So we found these results in Finland. You can see that the direct work share is actually much lower than reported in time sampling studies, because we use continuous streaming. It turned out that people are actually doing installation work in segments of just 1 minute at the time, 2 minutes, and then they had to interrupt their work and go somewhere else to pick materials or something different. So electricians spent 24% and plumbers were really struggling, and they spent 15% on this direct work. And then we can start to look at the other categories, and you see that the plumbers had a lot of discussions because they have inflexible systems and they need to coordinate designs on site, and every time they had to improvise, they had to go look for new materials. So you see that also hauling long distance was higher with the plumbers, searching for materials was higher, and non-work related actions such as waiting was higher for the plumbers. Electricians are able to make do with changing circumstances because they have much more flexible systems and they use more standard parts than plumbers.
It's interesting.
So big problems were identified in Finland, and many other studies have identified similar problems elsewhere. The reasons why people are wasting time, around 80% of the time that was not direct work could be explained by installers missing something. So they were not just wandering aimlessly because they had everything they need, but most of the time they were missing components or materials, or previous work was not completed as scheduled, or there was insufficient space, or they were missing some equipment and machinery. Design was also often the reason, but most of the time it was something physical and not information related that was missing. And it depends a little bit on project type and particular challenges, how these are collaborated. So you can see the impact of very good scheduling. The small project was the most complicated of this. It was 100,000 square meters, non-standardized areas, but it had the least problems with connecting works because they were doing really aggressive location-based scheduling, where they made sure that people are not on each other's way. And then you can see the connecting works, really big problem in apartment building 2, which had a COVID-19 related delays. So depending on particular circumstances, different projects have different issues, and by using this data, we were then able to find common root causes and how we can impact different interventions could help improve productivity. So basically, most of the root causes are quite simple. The problem is that how do you scalably solve this at all time for all crews? Communication, people don't have the information they need, and the schedules are always late, so installers cannot really, and workers cannot really use the schedule information that they're given by general contractors, and there's a lot of improvisation going on. The schedules are not up to date, not detailed enough to actually give information on worker level. Logistics and material handling has big problems. Normally, or one of these projects actually used a logistics contractor, third-party logistics, but most of the projects are not using third-party logistics, which means that you have as many logistical systems as you have contractors, and they are reserving space on first-come, first-served basis, which means scattered storage areas and materials on the way of other crews. Then, of course, the level of detail in design is a root cause of many issues. And a big part of work is preparation work, which results in many short movements, which lead to a large share of total time, indicating that prefabricating as much as possible will, of course, improve productivity. So these are not probably anything new. Many of you have seen similar problems, but then on the next slide, we saw what's the relative magnitude of these issues. Okay, that was not on the next slide. I remember incorrectly, but here are some challenges with the direct work studies and why automation is needed. So you can identify problems, you can identify where productivity could be improved, you can identify root causes, but it requires a lot of data and it's not real time. You cannot have researchers on every project measuring these percentages, and depending on particular circumstances of the job, you may have different issues. And also, it's very time consuming to go on second level, which is really needed, because when we take one plumber from the data set, he had 60 interruptions on one day, and the average duration of installation activity was 1 minute, 11 seconds. And then you have this hauling task, they can take 1 minute, so it's kind of one hauling activity is negligible, but then when you have a lot of those during the day, they pile up and cause this very low direct work percentages. So we need some kind of real-time and scalable productivity KPIs. And there the digital tools like Aiforsite can help. So we started figuring out what could be sensed easily, and movement is something that happens a lot on construction site, and much of the waste is movement. So you have these various areas for material storage, material handling, and work areas. And a big share of time of the worker is just moving from one area to the next and not actually spending time on the installation area. And this is something that can be sensed with technology. So we started already before Aiforsite was doing this, we started at university this kind of indoor positioning study to see how well can we understand productivity just by looking at locations. And we developed a prototype system where we had gateways in locations and workers were carrying beacons, important equipment had beacons. And then we also equipped materials with tags so that we were able to locate all resources. And then we started analyzing the presence of workers. And some results are on the next slide.
Yeah.
So we noticed that workers were overall spending 52% of their time in work locations, but it was more important to look at uninterrupted presence. So how big a share of time workers are able to spend in the work location without any interruptions. And then in our first data set of 41,000 minutes, the workers were there just 14,000 minutes for longer time periods than 10 minutes. That's 34%, which is quite close to the direct work percentages. And then with helmet camera studies, we had already identified that around half of the time in work location is wasted. So this 34% value adding time analyzed with positioning is very close to that 17% direct work share. And we validated this with many different ways and noticed that this uninterrupted presence is a quite good and scalable way to measure productivity. And then we also looked at how much workers are in the correct work location. If you go one more step down, versus you see the graph.
Yeah.
And just half the time, those people were active in the scheduled work location. So when you have this data for your project and can evaluate how much of the time is actually uninterrupted in any work location, you kind of see the share of direct work. And then you can start to evaluate the schedules, that how relevant are they for on-site production by looking at how much workers are in the correct work location. So we identified a couple of KPIs that could be measured in real time based on this presence. One is the presence index. So for every task or activity in a schedule, we look at how much uninterrupted presence there is. We have done a lot of studies now in Finland in different projects, and the measured average is 34%. So it means that workers need to be present just 1/3 of the time to achieve schedule objectives. So 67% of the time is for these other non-value adding tasks, movements and discussions and other things that do not require presence in the work location. And we have actually just finished the first doctoral study that analyzed this kind of data and presented these results. So we can probably also share that research for anybody who is interested. And then another one is presence to plan, which is uninterrupted presence divided by planned duration. So at the moment, at least in Finland, just 1/3 of the work time needs to be present to achieve schedule objectives because the work is so fragmented. If you eliminate that fragmentation, it means that you can decrease the duration of every single activity by 50%. Eliminating that fragmentation when you know where it occurs is actually quite simple. So you look at where the workers are spending their time. Most often they are moving between material storage areas, the location, and when you notice that one crew has a problem and the presence index is low, then you reorganize the logistics, move the materials closer to the work location, and you can see immediate productivity jump. And now there's kind of a scalable method to actually identify these opportunities. And obviously you spend more attention on improving productivity of critical tasks, which is maybe better for general contractor to do than just asking for more manpower to go to unproductive circumstances. So we are finding now that many general contractors are starting to use these to improve the process and productivity rather than relying on subcontractors adding more manpower to circumstances where they lose money. And that has been a game changer for many contractors in Finland.
The same applies in the UK, Olli, don't worry.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So those were the key findings related to productivity from my side. So how to change this productivity into cost savings? There, of course, first you need to show that you can do it. The next step is to add additional clauses to contracts. So if the subcontractors are working on fixed price projects and you improve their productivity, they are of course just making more money on subcontractor level, which could decrease the costs in the longer term, because then when they notice that in your projects the productivity is better, then they will start to bid lower in future projects. In order to get benefits in the short term, of course, you need to change the contracts, for example, to be target price, guaranteed maximum price type contracts, where you share the savings in manpower used. Or you can start to decrease the schedules. I said the result that just 34% of the presence is required to actually achieve the current schedule objectives, which means that there's an opportunity to cut schedules to half for most activities. So once you prove to yourself that this works, then you can start to shorten the schedules by eliminating fragmentation of work. And that will obviously lead to decreased general conditions, decreased need for this daily costs, and faster entry to market for the investment. That's normally the lowest hanging fruit. So many contractors here in Finland have started by decreasing the construction durations, because that's kind of the easy way to get money. And the next step is to start changing the contracts once they have more measurement data available. Contractors have also started to take centralized logistics, because logistics is such a big part of productivity that having every subcontractor bring their own materials is not productive for the whole production system. So many contractors have started to centralize the material deliveries, and that also increases productivity and decreases durations. So I would start by measuring first, showing in the projects that this is a real problem and we can actually do something about it. Once you show that you can actually eliminate this fragmentation, then most people can be convinced to start changing contracts and changing the production systems. That's absolutely the most important thing to do. So the lack of pre-planning, coordination of designs, those are kind of the biggest problems. And then there are still many things that happen during the work phase. So pre-planning has not been able so far. I have seen projects with a lot of pre-planning, but they still show relatively low percentages, and those require reactions on site. So pre-planning is absolutely necessary and beneficial, and you will see the difference. So we had the best project, I was telling you about the shopping mall. They had 10% higher direct work shares than other I didn't show by project, but that was the case. They had the best pre-planning and they had 10% higher direct work shares. But there was still a lot of improvement potential. Starting in probably the most impactful part, but still a lot of problems remain, and it's not so predictable that you can pre-plan for every eventuality. And but this kind of measurement can show that how much pre-planning helps, and we have already shown that difference also. Yes, we somehow need to turn the triangle upside down and move to some kind of servant leadership where everybody's trying to enable the workers. We have involved the trade unions heavily in the research.
Right.
And both the employers and employees agree that productivity is important, but the worker cannot do anything because the conditions for productivity are created by others, and that's why I think it's very important to work together.
Yeah, and we don't have a union base in the UK, unfortunately.
But it's the same on any individual. They are really frustrated by low productivity, that they feel that they cannot influence it too much. So we need to somehow figure it out. And I don't think this low presence was very rarely the workers' fault that they just wanted to wander around. It was always the production system that was the problem.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
It was possible to improve it.
Yeah.
And they had good ideas. They had been trying to share these ideas for decades, but nobody ever listened to them. And now we actually have some data that shows that they were right all these decades. It's time to take action.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you.
Remember that the 0 minutes was 54%. Then there was a sharp drop after 1 minute. And then we started to get, at 5 and 10 minutes, we started to get closer to those direct work shares.
Okay.
So we initially recommended 10 minutes, but now based on our helmet camera study, we are now saying that 5 minutes is actually probably better. And you can see that from 5 to 10 minutes, there's not such a big difference anymore, 37% to 34%. More time for subcontractors than allowed in the schedule, and the key is to compress the schedule, remove the fat from the schedule. Now the challenge is, in the beginning, the subcontractors really need that time, because the fragmentation is not caused by the subcontractor, but it's caused by bad conditions on the site. So you need to first show to the contractor and prove that you can remove the fragmentation. That now this 34% of the time can be done consecutively, with breaks in between where you have to wander around and look for people to improvise with. So that's kind of the first challenge. Measure that this phenomenon is happening, then remove that fragmentation. Then when you can show that we have removed the fragmentation, then everybody is happy to decrease and compress schedules. without changing the process and improve the conditions, you cannot compress the schedules. This technology is showing you where the opportunities are, but then it's up to you to actually do something about it, and only then you can start to compress the durations. We have noticed we are using tagged production, which has the same principle. Eliminate the buffers between tasks.
Yeah.
And it works better than having long time buffers because everybody's close to each other. They communicate about problems. They learn what the previous person says. So that's absolutely the right way to go. But even there, you see that people are estimating based on what it traditionally took. So you have this 60% of buffer within the critical chain.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
I think it's important to understand that the difference nowadays is that we can have the data in real time as well. So it's no longer hearsay or perceptions or arguments between one subcontractor to the next, or the subcontractor with the main contractor or everybody else. Real data will give us the information and it will be undisputed. So it's very important to understand the benefit of having that real data available to you. So in terms of wrap up, I just wanted to make sure that everybody knows that this is only the first webinar we're going to have. We are proposing a number of them over the next few months. This is the first step in the journey towards that holy grail of improved productivity, which has been eluding the industry for the last 50 years. Since we started subcontracting everything. In the old days, when contractors have their own direct labor, they knew exactly how productive they were, etc. But in the last 50 years or so, we lost that information in the UK and by the sounds of it across the world. So hopefully this will be the first step to grab that information, that data back, and become more productive by eliminating that waste. So, thank you very much, everybody, for joining. Please look out for the PowerPoints and the video recording, and also look out for the next webinar in the series. And we are looking forward to working with you and helping you to improve your productivity. Finally, I'd like to thank Jana for her assistance today, and very importantly, Olli. Thank you once again for disseminating your invaluable knowledge and experience, and opening up the door for us to understand productivity or direct work productivity in much more detail. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hope to see you everybody soon.